Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, that was so weird. Okay, I don't know why I did that. Okay, back on track. Back on track with the podcast. Okay, we're good. We're good. We're good. We're good. We're good. All right. So before we get going, I gotta give a bit of a spiel about what's going on, a bit of a layout of the podcast, and all bunch of stuff like that. If you type exclamation point podcast in chat, you can see what's going on. It'll give a little bit of an explanation. But yeah, so basically what's going on right now, because this is a podcast, I'm going to upload to Spotify, to Apple, to SoundCloud and YouTube and stuff like that. I'm going to have it so there's no TTS, there's no volume on the notifications, there's no sound alerts. I'm not going to be reading chat for now. I'm going to try and talk for about an hour. I might go a little bit longer than that, knowing myself. I kind of talk a lot. And after the podcast is done, we'll do a 30-minute Q&A about this topic or related topics, depending on what's going on. And we'll end the stream. And again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to type exclamation point podcast in chat. It'll kind of give a bit of an update as to what's going on. It is going to be me talking the whole time. Like I said, the first couple times, I'm going to have it just be me. Kind of get a feel for it. This is my first time ever doing a podcast by myself. So it's super new for me. So I hope you guys can cut me some slack. I'm going to get better as time goes on. But yeah, so hopefully it goes well. So the podcast is going to happen pretty much every week. I'm hoping, hopefully, if not, it'll be bi-weekly, depending on how I feel. It also depends on the workload. Workload is pretty hard this week, but that's fine. Like I said, I'm going to bring on other people eventually. People I know or people in the field or experts or stuff like that. And yeah, so before I go any further, I want to give a bit of an explanation about myself, a bit of background. So my name is Danny. Welcome to the podcast, DanyCakes DanyCakes with DanyCakes. Apologies for that. And yeah, so like I said, bit of a background about myself. So I graduated from UC Santa Cruz last year in the summer of 2020. So my last quarter was the very last quarter of, or was the very first quarter of COVID. And so yeah, but yeah, so I graduated from there with ecology and evolution with a bachelor's degree in that, bachelor's of science. I was cum laude, if it makes any difference. I don't think it does make that much of a difference, but yeah, so I focus mainly on ornithology, botany, restoration, and conservation, which is exactly what I'm talking about today. As you guys can see in the bottom, today's topic will be the intro and a debate about restoration and conservation as well. And yeah, so for work, I worked at a couple different places when I was still in college and community college. I was a soccer coach for 4 years, working with kids age 2 to 10, trying to get back to the community, trying to have fun trying to work with, yeah, it was super fun. I really enjoyed it a lot. I worked there for 4 years, and then when I went to UC Santa Cruz, I got a job at a reserve, which is super, super cool. And I was a steward of the reserve for a while, so I got to know a lot of scientific names, got to know a lot of different plants, got to know a lot of different stuff like that. I really enjoyed it. I was the steward there for about a year, but I worked at the reserve for maybe I think 2.5 years. And so I got to know the reserve really intimately, which is where all my information comes from this, specifically about the restoration and conservation aspect, which again is what I'm talking about today, just because it's the thing I know the most about. And so I want to talk about it a lot, as much as I can. And yeah, currently I work in bays throughout the San Francisco Bay Area, helping to remove an invasive grass that's in there. I help to identify it, which is very difficult, and I help to eradicate it as well. And we also help endangered birds. So it's very cool. I'm an actual scientist, not a fake scientist. And yeah, and so about the podcast, like I said, I wanted to do this for a while. It's always been, predominantly on stream. I play Overwatch, which I enjoy. I enjoy the people, I enjoy the community that's in there. But, I've always wanted to branch out. Whenever things get brought up in my chat about politics or stuff like that, I kind of go crazy. I talk about it way, way, way too much. And so, yeah, this is an opportunity for me to actually talk to you guys about my major, what I'm super passionate about, what I do for a living, which I'm super excited about. I also feel like environmentalism isn't really talked about that much on Twitch. I feel like it's kind of a taboo topic. There's a couple people who do a lot of stuff for it. Obviously, Maya is the biggest one, and she runs the Nature Conservancy, or she runs a conservancy that she got money donated to her. She fundraised it on stream, which is crazy. And she's a falconer, so she owns birds and does that kind of stuff. And it's amazing what she does for the community. She has a really great podcast if you guys want to check it out. It's kind of what I'm modeling this after because she did it so effectively. And so I'm taking a lot of inspiration from her. But yeah, again, not that much talk about environmentalism on Twitch, which I don't understand why. So I want to kind of help fill that niche because I do have good insight into what's going on with this. And I think also science communication in general is a huge, huge issue. You don't really get that many opportunities to talk with somebody who's a scientist about hard topics. And science is difficult. Even if you're in the field, even if you're talking to scientists, professors every single day, it's really difficult. It's difficult to grasp the concepts that are talked about. And there's so much jargon that gets thrown around by scientists. There's the amount of egos in science is crazy. Reading a lot of papers that I read today for the sources for this podcast, it just reiterates how much of an ego some scientists have. They refer to each other by name and they talk about each other just like it's crazy. And so one of the biggest things in science is that you cannot have an ego. I'm going to talk about that in one of the streams eventually because I'm super passionate about that as well. Obviously, I come off as someone who has a ton of, I have a huge ego. I'm super high in myself and super I'm not. When it comes to science, you have to be humble. You have to be you have to have a lot of humility. Understand when you can make mistakes. Understand that everybody makes mistakes. Understand that you're going to make mistakes all the time. When I'm out in the field identifying grasses are hard to identify. You make mistakes. Everybody does. But a lot of people don't like to admit that. And so science communication is huge and needs to be talked about a lot more. Talking about things in a layman's issue or in layman's terms. It's super, super big to try and do that kind of stuff. And so I want to try and bridge the gap between science and you guys. If you guys aren't in the science field, I really want to talk to you guys, engage with you guys in a meaningful conversation with things that you guys can understand. Because like I said, honestly, it's really difficult to understand things. I read a whole bunch of papers today and they're pretty difficult to understand unless you're in the field. And so I want to break down those papers, break down a lot of the research and talk to you guys about that, give you guys the real issues, but not only give you guys my side of the story, because obviously I'm super opinionated, but I also want to talk to you guys about the other side as well, which is what I'm trying to do today. It's difficult to keep your bias out of everything, and so I try to stay unbiased as possible, but I will be biased, and I apologize for that. It's something it's human nature. And I feel like also doing this really helps me improve myself. I was super, super nervous before I started, and I'm still a little bit nervous, so I apologize if that shows. Hopefully it doesn't, but I feel like doing research and doing this kind of stuff really helps me improve myself as a person. I learned so much about restoration and conservation today. It's crazy. There's so much of a debate, so much discourse in the scientific community about this kind of stuff, and it's super cool. Not only does it benefit myself, but it also benefits you guys as well. Talking to you guys, like I said, this is really complicated stuff, so I'm excited to get to share this with you guys. And yeah, science is a huge grayscale. You can take data from this really abstract topic and you can give it to two different scientists. And one guy will go with one scientist will go with one side of the spectrum, the other one will go with the complete other side of the spectrum. Like I said, you can give them the same exact data and they'll end up with two different conclusions. And that's how it is. They're both right. And that's the difficult thing about science is you have to form your own opinion based on the facts that are issued to you. And science always changes. So your opinion also always changes. So it's a big thing to give people second chances in the scientific community because they could be looking at skewed data. They could be looking at that kind of stuff. And so everything is always about that kind of stuff. But yeah, what is that nodders, by the way? Jesus Christ. Anyways, yeah, so the topic I'm going to talk about today will be the philosophical debate between restoration and conservation and the issues that deals with that. So like I said, my experience mainly in college was talking about conservation, restoration, ornithology, and botany, which all relates into restoration. It's what I've done, it's what I currently do, and I also do conservation. Back at the reserve that I worked at, we planted a whole bunch of plants. We would actively go out along the coastline, collect native seeds from different areas so we could keep the biodiversity or the genetic diversity high at the reserve. We would plant those, grow them from seed, and then plant them on the field. So we actively did restoration, but we also did conservation on areas that we had already planted. We would go out and we would weed. We would monitor stuff to make sure that everything was still going well, which is a big thing that's underrepresented in the scientific community, specifically restoration. Not a lot of long-term monitoring. It doesn't really happen that often. So obviously, if I've worked at a job doing restoration and conservation, I will be a little bit biased in this conversation. So the first thing that I want to start off with will be the other side of the argument, talking about why restoration may not be the best. Talk about why maybe it's, not the greatest. Because realistically, it has issues. Everything in science has issues, and you have to understand that. It's a big thing that things will always change. And so, yeah. I have notes on the left side of my screen, so that's somebody looking over there a lot. I have a lot of quotes. I have a lot of sources that I have over there, and I wrote down my whole outline. Once the stream is over, once I'm done with the Q&A, or once I'm done with the actual podcast itself, like I said, I'll do a 30-minute Q&A. And once I'm done with the actual podcast, the hour-long talk, I'll give you guys the Google Doc that has all my outlines and has all my sources, just so you guys know that I'm actually referencing something. I'm not just talking out of my ass giving you guys my opinion, because that's not what I want to do. Or talking out of my butt. I maybe shouldn't cuss. Also, again, I apologize for the bit rate. It looks like it's pretty bad. Hopefully it looks stable. I'm recording it as well, so I'll upload it to YouTube. I'll upload it to stuff like that. So it should be good. But yeah, so the first thing I want to talk about is what restoration is. Restoration is in a disturbed area caused by human interference or other interference. People go back and they'll try and actively restore an area back to what they think it was or what they thought it was. Both in terms of plants, it can be in terms of animals, it can be about whatever, but you're basically reintroducing native plants, native animals back to the habitat that they were in before. And yeah, so the main goal of restoration is to increase biodiversity and try to bring historical areas back to how they used to be, which is where the problem comes from. Yeah, the biggest thing about restoration is that it is mostly guesswork. You can take data from the past and you can analyze and see what plants were there, what animals were there. But at the end of the day, you're not going to get 100% of the plants. You're going to get some extra plants. There are always plants that reintroduce themselves in areas when they're non-native. So a lot of it is guesswork, which leads to interpretations and the arguments that lead to it. One of the biggest things you'll hear is that people will say, oh my God, like you guys are just playing God out there when you're restoring things, because that's what you do. Sorry, that's not what you do. Sorry, messing up. People will say you're playing God because you're introducing species that you think are out there, but they may not actually be out there. So the first source that I have is from Eric Katz back in 2012, who talked about the same exact thing. And so he said that all restoration projects all restoration projects share the presence of human intentionality and design. And what that means is he's basically saying that even though we're trying to restore these areas back to how they used to be, we're essentially imprinting human thoughts, human feelings, how we think it should look onto the landscape, which is obviously what we don't want. When you restore an area, you want it to look as natural and be as natural as possible. You want it to ultimately go back to being self-autonomous, to where it can just be a community and not have to have any intervention. Realistically, that doesn't happen anymore because of all the introduced species that we have. And so he argued against a guy named Robert Elliott, and Robert Elliott talked about how restoration was used for a long time by corporations as a guise, or they would use restoration as a guise to completely extract everything from the landscape. The example that he gave was you have a dune area that has a ton of plants on it, but they need the sand. So they take out all the plants, take up all the sand, and like, don't worry, we're just going to put all these things back. We're going to restore it back to how it was, and it'll be fine. Don't worry about it, guys. Corporations did it all the time. All the time they would do that. They would just falsely operate under that guise of restoration. People are like, that's okay. They're restoring it. They're going to make it as good as it was before. When realistically, there's absolutely no way possible to do that. And so Eric Katz in his paper, he said that there's no way. That was a complete extreme of the argument that Robert Elliott gave. Eric Katz argued that the claim that restoration is purely a beneficial thing, saying that humans have too much of an imprint on what we perceive to be natural, which is completely true. We do. Working in the field of restoration, we absolutely imprint our own thoughts, our own feelings onto things, because we do it in a way where it's going to benefit us economically, politically, aesthetically, and all the other ways like that. He talked about human restoration as a way of a human artifact, and the way that it served a purpose for us. We don't ever just go out and restore an area because we're like, might as well. We're not going to get much value out of it, so we'll do it. And we always get a value out of it. We always have a certain goal, like I said, whether it be economic, political, or aesthetic, which natural systems are not. They're not like that at all. They're Darwinian in nature. And when I say Darwinian, I mean that they're in a constant state of flux. They're always trying to be the best that they can. They're trying to evolve. They're trying to spread their genes. They're trying to live as long as they can. They're not out there for any reason other than just to live. But when we plant these plants, they're out there for a reason. And so it creates that weird, it is a little bit of a weird zone where we are, like I said, imprinting ourselves on the land. And yeah, he also came back, he also quoted and said, to call the product of an ecological restoration project the restoration of nature is, as he says, a big lie. So what he's saying is that you can't restore an area and then like, oh, this area is a natural restoration. This area is just like how nature was. He basically called it a big lie, which is a huge claim to make, because it's as close as we can humanly get to having it be natural. In this world, now that there's so many things that have been introduced and not imprinted, so many things that have been introduced and so many things that have, invaded natural spaces, is insane. And so what you can call natural really depends. It's a really complex debate that goes back and forth. He ended the paper that he wrote, a 31-page paper, which I read. He said, the issue is not what we do, It's what our actions mean. Ecological restoration will always be an expression of the human project of the domination of nature, the attempt to control a world that is distinct and separate from humanity. And so what he's saying is that even when we're restoring areas to bring them back to how they used to be, back to how they naturally were, it's all human dominated. It's always done by us, for us, benefiting us, so we can dominate nature, which is what we've done for a long time. We've always done that. And so it's really difficult. I think that while he has really good points in this paper, he also fails to talk about a lot of things, which I'll get to in a second. But it is a really interesting perspective, because when you hear the word restoration, when I hear the word restoration, I think of, that's awesome. We need to do way more of that, because there are so many areas that we've dug out. We have quarries. We have all these areas that are completely disturbed by human causes. And so the word restoration has a very, very positive connotation to it. It's just something that you love to hear. The public loves to hear restoration. So it is a very interesting perspective to try and think of it in a negative light, and as if it's just a human expression of us dominating the landscape, which is what we did for so long. Like I said, you look at all these cities. One thing that I really like to do, and this is kind of a sidetrack, one thing I really like to do as a thought experiment is when you're in a city and you kind of know what the outskirts of it look like, what the plants and what the environment looks like out there, you sit in the middle of a city and you look at the landscape and you think, I wonder what this looked like before humans came around. Like, what plants were right here? Has it always been flat? Has there always been a hill right here? And it's really interesting to try and think of it in that way, because we can't ever know again. As much as you want to, as much as you want to visualize what it looks like, that's your thoughts. It's never going to look like that ever, which is terrible to think. And there are cases, obviously, like Chernobyl, where it's completely, we had that radiator or the nuclear meltdown, and the area is completely irreversibly destroyed for a long time. I mean, for at least like 10,000 years. Within a human lifespan, it's irreversibly destroyed. But nature bounced back. There's a whole lot of documentaries about it bouncing back, but it's never going to be like it was. Even though nature is now flourishing there, the fauna are returning, the flora is returning, it's never going to be back to a natural state. And so it is really interesting to think of restoration and conservation as a whole, in that negative light, where it's just humans imprinting what we think is right. So basically, even though his paper talked about how bad restoration can be and how it's just a human construct, he was basically arguing that conservation is the best thing, that leaving lands untouched is for the best. But at this point in human history, there's not a single landscape that we have not touched. We have completely irreversibly changed the entire climate, changed the entire landscape of everything. It doesn't matter where you are, everything has always been touched. That's how it is. We no longer live in a time where you can go out and you can explore and find a new country, where you can go out and explore and easily find new plants, new species. It's not like that anymore. We've irreversibly changed everything, which is hard. And yeah, like I said, he talked about restoring areas as if they're artifacts, just things of human imprint. The problem with saying that is he always says that that's just how they are. They're never going to be natural. But I think that in a human way, it's the most natural things we'll ever get to be again. If you restore an area, sure, it has economic benefits. It has political benefits. People like to look at it. But the thing is, if you do it correctly and you do it right and you leave it to be how it is, it'll be the most natural that it can be again, because it's never going to be natural ever again. But by restoring it, you can help, give it a kickstart and become natural again. And so I think his paper was in a very pessimistic light about humans. And like I said, it's a view that even though it's something that, a lot of people disagree with, because this is the minority. His view is the minority. It's a view that, like I said, in science, you're going to have those different sides of an argument. Even they're both right. He is right about a lot of this stuff. But rather than letting this stifle the debate about restoration and conservation, what we should do is incorporate a lot of what he said into how we actively restore areas. We must let systems be as wild as they can be, while also helping them to get there. That's the best thing we can do. It's the only thing we can do at this point. His conversation about humans imprinting on the environment creates a catch-22. And so that helping nature at all is imprinting on them, right? Humans go out there, you restore an area, you're imprinting on it. That's how it is. But also, inaction is also imprinting on it. It creates this weird dynamic where even if you don't restore an area, it's still imprinting on it, because you're saying that's how it should be. We're going to imprint on it. And so it creates this weird catch-22 where no matter what you do, you can't do anything. It creates a hard line to pass where inaction is the same as action, when that is simply not the case. Action in these situations in my biased opinion, action in these situations is better. He gave an example of a 300-year of a farmland on a prairie. So say you're in Oklahoma and you own a farm, and you think to yourself, I'm just not getting much value out of this farm anymore. I'm going to give it back to the state, and I'll let them restore it. I'll let them bring it back to how it was. And he says that what we should do, his argument was that we should leave it for 300 years. And in the 300 years, it's not going to be prairie. It's not going to be a farmland. It's going to be in the middle of that. But he says we should do that so that it'll become a natural state. But the problem is, even if we don't restore it, it's still not going to be natural. It never will be again because we've already imprinted on it. So what we should do, in my opinion, the best thing to do in this situation would be to help quickstart it. Give it a couple seeds, give it a couple plugs in the ground so you can kickstart that natural succession and bring it back to being an autonomous feature of the world that keeps itself going and is natural again. I'm sorry, I apologize. I didn't realize this stuff would be this hard to understand. If you get, like I said, we'll have a Q&A and we'll talk about all this stuff. I am very opinionated about this kind of stuff. It is really hard because even though restoration, it looks like the right thing to do, it's difficult because you're always thinking of what should be there rather than just letting nature take its course. And so it's a really hard topic to say, well, we should restore everything. Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we shouldn't. And that's a really hard topic to talk about. But yeah, so the next source I want to talk about, and this is flipping the coin, this is back on the side of the majority, people who say that restoration is good. This is about Choi, or this is by an author named Young D. Choi. And he talks about futuristic restoration, or trying to restore the future, or trying to restore areas for the future rather than for the past. Typically when we look at an area that's restored, it's always plants that have historically been there. It's always plants that we know are there, so we're going to plant them. But it's never looking at what's ahead, because ultimately that's what nature does. Nature takes its course and it always will survive, no matter what. And so even though, so many current restoration efforts try to emulate the past and have some great results. They really do. Things have gone back to a natural state, right? Trying to restore for future generations, taking a whole ecological approach rather than an ad hoc gardening approach will be necessary. So rather than just saying, let's plant this area, and then we'll keep, weeding it. We'll keep planting if stuff doesn't happen. That's what a garden is, right? That's literally the definition of a garden. When you plant plants in your garden, you plant ones that look good, you plant ones that you like, and then you pull the weeds. And essentially, even at the reserve that I worked at, that's what it is. It's a huge gardening thing, right? It's all just one big garden. And so rather than trying to make a landscape into a garden where you hand select every single plant that should be there and every single thing that should be there, what we should be trying to do instead is let natural succession take its course. Plant things out in a way where plant things out to where the future will be more benefited than the present. Because that's ultimately what we're doing. We're not planting for the present, we're planting for the future, which is a big thing. One thing that kind of throws a monkey wrench into restoration and conservation's efforts is hybrids. And if you guys don't know, hybrids are basically when two species of either a plant or an animal come together and breed. And so they're completely separate species. Say, for example, a lion and a tiger mix, and they hybridize and they create a liger. That's an example of hybridization. Obviously, ligers aren't fertile, and so they're not a species, but that is an example of hybridization. The example I want to talk about is an example with northern spotted owls, and I don't know the other species. This is, again, I'm going off the script here, but this is something that is super interesting. So basically in Northern California, there's a species of owl called a northern spotted owl, and they're kind of an indicator as to how well the environment is doing based on how they're doing. And so there's a lot of studies into looking at how, at where they are, how many populations there are, and that kind of stuff. But the problem is, with climate change and with all these ever-changing things, they're not adapting fast enough to respond to it. And so what's happened recently is they've hybridized with this invasive species from the east. And they've actually adapted a lot faster. Yeah, Leah, if you know the name of the owls that they breed with, that'd be great. I don't know the other owls. But the northern spotted owls hybridize with this other species, and they become a lot more, they adapt a lot quicker because of the adaptations at the East Coast. Yeah, okay. There we go. So the northern spotted owls hybridize with the barred owl. And with the barred owl, they create this hybrid that adapts super fast, and it takes over areas because it's so well adapted to the climate, to the areas it's living, to the environment. And so it takes over the areas of the northern spotted owl. So it's pushed the northern spotted owl into the endangered list. And the problem is, technically, that hybrid between them is native. Technically, it's not. It's half and half, native and non-native, which is such a weird thing. And obviously, that same thing happens with plants, where two plants hybridize. One is invasive, one is native, and they hybridize. That hybrid becomes extremely invasive, extremely pervasive, and takes over landscapes. It's easier when it's a plant, because you're like, well, we can just kill that plant, whatever. Like, it's not that big of a deal. We'll just call the hybrid. We'll plant the native back in the place. But the thing is, it's not so easy when it's an owl. Everybody loves owls. I love owls. Every time I see an owl, I'm like, oh my God, that's so sick. I never see them. So the problem is, you can't just go out and kill owls. It's not something that the public wants to have happen, which is where you get the funding. It's not something people who are working in this field want to do. When I got into this field, I wasn't expecting myself to be like, we're going to go and kill all these owls. We're going to kill all these plants. But that's what you end up doing. And so hybrids are very difficult because the conversation goes so back and forth. In terms of plants, when you have a hybrid plant, you say, let's kill it. It's super easy. We can spray some herbicide. We can pull it. We can do whatever, and we'll get rid of it. But when it's a hybrid of an owl, it creates a whole different topic because people are like, well, it's an owl, it's native. We shouldn't kill it. And so the same thing doesn't apply to both of them, even though technically they're within the same argument. And so hybrids are very difficult because in that way, people say, well, you're playing God even more. And that's something that people say about everything. Is you're just playing God. You're planting things you think should be there. You're killing things you think shouldn't be there, when maybe they should be. Nativity, things being native to an area, maybe shouldn't apply anymore because of how widespread invasives are. So it's crazy. So going back to Choi's study, he basically says that the direct goal of conservation or restoration should be to increase or maintain biodiversity. And biodiversity leads to much more resilient environments, directly benefiting humans. So when you have a more diverse ecosystem, you have more pollinators, you have more plants, you have more animals, you have more mammals, more birds, more stuff like that. So if there's a disease that goes around and kills one species of bird or kills one species of plant, you have all these plants and all these animals that can fill that niche within that role, and the area will remain undisturbed. And so yes, the area will remain undisturbed, which is great. That's what you want to have happen. But if you have just this monoculture of a couple plants, a couple animals, and one of them dies out, you're kind of screwed in that area. And so having this huge biodiverse area is great. And that's what restoration's goal is to bring back the native biodiversity. Because when you have a disturbed area, you have, in California specifically, we have a shrub called coyote brush, which is technically native. But when it's left in undisturbed areas, it takes off. And it takes over landscapes. And that's not great. It doesn't lead to a biodiversity of birds or pollinators or insects or stuff like that. And so increasing the biodiversity in these areas by removing that plant and then planting in other ones makes it you have more biodiversity, things become more resilient, and that's great for nature, great for us. One big thing that gets talked about a lot, and this is a huge topic in ecology, is ecosystem services. And so this study that I read was done by Boland and Hunhammer back in 1999. And I think it was one of the first, maybe the first, within the first 5 years of ecosystem services being talked about. Ecosystem services are things that we directly benefit from the services that ecosystems give to us, which has indirect and cultural effects. And they're always positive. So ecosystem services are things like you plant a tree, it takes in all the CO2, sequesters it, and then breathes out oxygen. That's great. We benefit from that. It's hard to put a financial number on that. It's hard to say, well, the tree sequestered this much carbon dioxide and let out this much oxygen. So it roughly costs $500 that we're saving every year from planting that tree. It's really hard to put an economic number on that. But that's what people do. The world is driven by money. It always has been. It's always been driven to make money, which complicates things because, you have all these factories that produce all this carbon dioxide and emit it into the air. And there's no repercussions. They clear landscapes. They clear all these forests out that would sequester that carbon and then build this factory that produces tons and tons of carbon dioxide. And for what? They make a ton of money. They move on. That's happened for the past couple hundred years since the Industrial Revolution. And so having these ecosystem services with trees, and the trees are just one example, obviously. The paper goes into 7 main urban ecosystem services that we use and one big one. The ecosystem services that they talk about within urban settings are street trees, parks, urban forests, cultivated land, wetlands, lakes or seas, and streams. Every single one of those has a major, major, major economic impact on humans and benefits us immensely. And so as an example, air filtering of trees, air filtering of stuff like this really helps. It sequesters carbon dioxide and releases oxygen into the air. That really helps. And like I said, it's hard to put an exact number on that. Microclimate regulation. Within cities, because of air conditioning, taking the cool air outside and moving inside, pumping hot air out, it creates these really hot microclimates. So if you're ever in the city and it's super hot in one area and you go to the outskirts and it's much cooler, that's because of the microclimates. Trees obviously help with shading and they intake that sun. So they decrease the amount of microclimates that are there. It kind of spreads the temperature out evenly, which is how Earth usually is. Noise reduction. There was a study found that I think it's like, I was on air filtering. Anyways, noise reduction is a huge thing. Humans have always grown up. Humans have evolved in nature where it's been quiet. You hear birds, you hear the wind blowing, you hear streams running, you hear stuff like that. Nowadays, you take a step outside and what do you hear? The first thing you hear is a car, and then you hear an ambulance, and then you hear people yelling at each other. You hear all this stuff happening all at once. That's not how humans have evolved. And humans go hiking to escape that. They go camping, and when you go to when you hike and when you camp, you're going into natural areas, to native areas. And so it's very weird that we don't have trees or plants more in the cities because it would help reduce that amount of noise, or help reduce the amount of noise. And again, that has a direct economic cost because people pay money to go camping, to do this kind of stuff. And it also drives people kind of crazy. And so they go to the hospital, they go to this kind of stuff because of stress relief, or because they need stress relief. And again, that has a direct cost on humans. It's not one that's easy to calculate, but there is a cost. Rainwater drainage, such as stopping floods, is another big, big, big thing. Mangroves in Florida have always historically stopped the wave interaction and have let these barrier islands build up over the years. But as you remove mangroves to build these huge apartment buildings, these huge houses, erosion is happening a lot faster in these barrier islands, which is awful. And so it takes away the land that people, built. They took these mangroves away to build these buildings. But by taking the mangroves away, it erodes the area faster, and so they have less of a lifespan with the building, which is insane. It's kind of crazy. Another big thing is sewage treatment or waste treatment, which is in marshes, and recreational and cultural values. A lot of cultures benefit directly from having biodiversity or by having stuff like that, by having these ecosystem services. And apparently some common and so while ecosystem services sound amazing, you directly benefit from having these. You directly benefit from having trees, from having plants, from having huge parks, from having all this stuff within a city, which is amazing. We need more big parks. We need more restoration within cities to help with these issues. It's not a cure-all. It's kind of a Band-Aid over the thing that we've already caused. You have this huge cut and you put a Band-Aid over it. Yeah, sure, it helps a little bit, relieves the pain a little bit, but there's still a big issue. The problem is that Band-Aid always doesn't work. The ecosystem services, apparently some common city trees, and this is a direct quote from Boland and Hunhammer in this paper, some common city trees, such as pine, oak, and willow, emit volatile organic compounds that may contribute to urban smog and ozone problems. So even if you plant these trees, they still do all this stuff. They still emit these compounds that lead to smog and smoke, which are obviously super detrimental, when you would think they do with the opposite, but they don't. Animals such as birds at municipal solid waste dumps or frogs in wetlands could cause disturbing noise, and the restoration of wetlands could cause problems such as increased mosquito hatching and bad odors. I will be the first to say, I can't eat eggs anymore. After working in marshes for 2 months, I can't eat eggs anymore. It smells so bad. So I know exactly what this means about it smelling bad. You have these wetlands, you have all these areas that are amazing, but they also have a drawback, which is like people don't like them. Marshes are smelly, they're stinky. People don't go in them for a reason. We've obviously destroyed a ton of them, but they do kind of stink. They do kind of smell. Parks can be dangerous during the dark hours. And a complete cost-benefit analysis of land use and urban ecosystems, all these negative aspects have to be reviewed as well. Everything that we do, even if it's restoration, even if it seems purely good, always has a negative side. And again, it's something you have to take into account in science. They end the paper saying it should, however, be remembered that it is only the effects of these problems that are decreased, not the cause of the problem that's solved. So even by having all these ecosystem services which directly benefit us, it's only a band-aid. It's not actually solving anything. And back on the restoration train, instead of the ecosystem services, which again still benefits or still relates to restoration, there's a paper out by Bullock, Pywell, and Walker, which talked about biodiversity. And it's really easy just to hear the word biodiversity and think that it's really good, because it is. But it's hard to think to yourself, why would biodiversity exactly be good, other than the resilience thing I already talked about? Because ecosystems will be resilient the more plants they have, the more species they have. But it's hard to actually think about economic impacts that we get from having that biodiversity, right? So what they did, they made a study and they planted 2 different agricultural fields of grasses. They planted one with only 8 species of grass, and then planted one with 27 species of grass and a whole bunch of different forbs, which are basically wildflowers. And these were farms that, eventually turn into hay. They eventually turn into all this stuff. And so they planted these 2 different sites with these differing levels of biodiversity. And then they measured it over 8 years to see what the economic impact for the farmers was. And what they found was that the areas that have a lot more biodiversity, all these forbs, all these different grasses, actually increase the amount of hay the farmers had, which is crazy, right? These lower biodiversity areas produce less hay. They have less, the farmers don't benefit from it as much economically. They don't get the same amount of money from these lower biodiversity areas as they do with the higher biodiversity areas. And so having this higher biodiversity, like I said, increases the resilience. So this higher species rich area will stay like that for generations. And it will constantly increase the amount of money that farmers get for generations, while also being biodiverse. So it's basically a win-win. I'm kind of getting towards the end. This is a big thing I'm going to talk about for the end. It's the future and realistic goals of restoration and conservation as a whole. I have about 22 more minutes left to talk about this kind of stuff. And yeah, so like I said, conservation is better in the long run. So, okay. Big deep breath. One big thing is the difference between restoration and conservation. Conservation is conserving lands and it's conserving nature how it is, while restoration is taking this disturbed area, bringing it back to how we think it should be, which is what I talked about earlier, and how there are both positives and negatives on both sides. Conservation generally is better in the long run because it's not so much about guesswork. It's about preserving something that's already there in a historic landscape. And so you really get to keep that intact ecosystem rather than just having human imprints on it. One big thing is that science communication must be better about conservation and restoration. Being in this field, it's very politicized. Climate change is a topic that for some reason has been politicized by both sides, unfairly, unjustly, and unnecessarily. Climate change is happening. Whether you like it or not, scientists agree that climate change is happening and we've caused it. It's accelerating, it's getting worse. We have to do something to stop it. But the problem is, in your general life, you don't talk to that many people who know about this stuff intimately, deeply. They know about this stuff a lot. So science communication, which is what I'm doing right now, communicating sources, communicating the knowledge that I gained at a 4-year university to you guys in a way that you guys can actually understand, and maybe you can't. Maybe I'm not doing a good job at it. Maybe I'm part of the problem, which is why I'm doing this. I want to keep getting better at science communication so that I can keep talking to the public about these issues, because they're huge issues. Our generation is at an extreme risk of, horrible things happening to us, and it's caused by us. We've done this. So having these talks, having these conversations is immensely necessary. We need to have these. Yeah, like I said, and scientists always have this big jargon. We always use the biggest words because we're the smartest, and we have big egos because we're smart. That's not how it should be. Scientists should be able to lay out in layman's terms what's going on within a paper. Casual conversations need to be had for the betterment of scientists and regular citizens. Back in 2006, Phil McManus put it brilliantly when Australia was trying to implement a large-scale mangrove planting, saying that It's necessary to understand science is socially constructed, that the application of science in ecological restoration must articulate with human values of desired natures, and that the articulation of values is best achieved through the appropriate timing of a participatory approach to restoration. And again, that's very wordy. It's very jargony. There's a lot of words that are, it's hard to read. It's hard to understand. What he's basically saying is, for the betterment of restoration, for the betterment of the world, we need to have these conversations with people about why plants are better. In this specific situation, Australia was trying to plant mangroves on the northern part of their island because there was a lot more erosion happening because we took all the mangroves out. But what ended up happening is people got really mad. They're like, well, that's going to ruin my beach. I'm not going to be able to go to the beach as much because these mangroves are being planted. So I'm going to get mad about that. I'm going to get up in arms. When realistically, what should have happened, scientists should have had a conversation with the public and said, hey, we're going to plant these mangroves out here, and here's why. It's going to directly benefit you guys. It's going to lead to less erosion, which means that your property values are going to decrease at a much lower rate. It's going to have all these ecosystem benefits. It's going to give you guys more oxygen. It's going to sequester more carbon, which is great in the long run of climate change, and lay out all these things in an easily digestible format. But the problem is they didn't. They just said, we're going to plant these mangroves because that's what science says we should do. And people got mad about that. And so what Phil McManus was basically saying in that whole thing, the only way that restoration will work is if it has the public's positive interest in it. If the public perceives it as positive, we're going to have more restoration. We're going to have more funding for it. We're going to have more areas to restore. But if we have a negative connotation with restoration because of scientists like this who just hammer in, we're going to restore this area because that's what science says, it's not going to do anything. We need to have meaningful conversations where people can actually understand what's going on. In other words, increasing public perception of large-scale restoration projects by engaging in these meaningful conversations with no judgments, with no egos, is 100% essential in building relationships with communities and accessing more funding. We're not going to get any funding if we're using these big jargony words, or we're talking about, all these things that it's hard to digest, hard to understand. We need to have these things be easily accessible, easily read by people so that everybody can understand it, so that we can access more funding, access more lands. And by doing that, it creates kind of a roller coaster, or not a roller coaster, it creates kind of a snowball, and it keeps getting better and better and better. The more you talk about it, the better it gets, the more funding you get. The more funding you get, the more restoration projects you do, the more you get to talk to the public about that kind of stuff. And so I think it was brilliantly put by him, saying that we just need to have conversations about these things in order for them to have good public perception so that we can keep doing restoration. One paper that I really, really respected, I think honestly my favorite paper that I read today was by John Weens and Richard Hobbs, and they gave recommendations for what we should do in the future, specifically regarding conservation and restoration. And what they said is that conservation and restoration, typically right now, when I mentioned that I have a background in ecology and evolution, I mentioned specifically that I have a background in conservation and restoration, in both of them, right? In both of them. It's not restoration or conservation, in both of them. What we should be doing is calling it all conservation or calling it all restoration, and basically making it so it's all intertwined, because it's detrimental for the scientific community and for the whole world to have these things be so against each other, so opposed. There's a big argument about whether conservation is better, whether restoration is better. They're both amazing for us. So why don't we stop butting our heads and pulling together and playing for one team rather than playing for two teams? And this topic, or this paper they wrote, was super, super well put. I'll give it a link after the stream if you guys want to read it. It makes everything super digestible. But again, there's no public comment. There's no public conversation about papers like this. It was amazingly done. And they laid out what we should be doing, future steps for future generations. And like I said, intertwining conservation and restoration, bringing them together rather than having them as separate entities. And they laid out how many steps? I think 4 steps about what we should do to try and better restoration and better the world. They talked about embracing uncertainty. Obviously, with the whole COVID situation, or not COVID situation, with the coronavirus currently plaguing the earth and causing a massive pandemic all across the world, shutting down the entire economy for about 2 years now, things change. And this is specifically America centric, so I apologize if you're from Europe or from somewhere other than America, but Dr. Fauci came out and said, we don't need masks. That's what the science said at the time. He said, masks don't work, so we're just not going to recommend you guys wear them, because why would you guys do that if it's not going to do anything? A couple weeks later, he came out and said, we need to have masks. And then now he's saying, well, maybe we shouldn't have to wear masks outside, and we don't have to wear them inside because people are getting vaccinated. And then more studies came out and said, well, you don't have to wear them outside, but inside you should really keep wearing them because that's what the science has said. And so people on either side of the spectrum have taken that and been like, why is he flip-flopping? Should I wear a mask? Should I not wear a mask? I'm just not going to wear one because that's what he said one time. We have to embrace uncertainty as a scientist. Things constantly change. We thought for a long time that we were the center of the universe. It took us a long time to realize we're not. It took us a long time to realize we're not in the center of the galaxy. We're not. It took us a long time to realize all these things and embrace the uncertainty of science and embrace that things always change. What could be held as a common perception right now may not be in 50 years. And that's just how things are. You have to constantly change your opinion. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind. So like I said science, and especially the environment, is an ever-changing field. It's impossible to ever predict things with absolute certainty, as we've seen in this coronavirus pandemic. Embracing that uncertainty and having adaptive management skills with changing goals and clear communication is the best thing. If things change, if new studies come out and say that we shouldn't wear masks inside, be clear about that. Say that science has said that we should do this. It's a very big thing to have these open conversations with people and let them know that the science has changed. This isn't my opinion. This is just a fact. Things have changed. And we should be more adaptive as humans. We shouldn't just rely on one thing being true because everything is not always true. The more you live, the more you realize that life is just one big giant grayscale. And it's kind of scary. It's hard to wrap your mind around, honestly. The next thing they said we should do is to frame realistic and complementary goals. Basically boiling down to saying conservation and restoration must be a joint effort rather than the disjointed effort that it is currently. To add on, goals for both must change. We must understand historic sites better to understand how to utilize the current sites. This would help to dissuade people who are saying that we're playing God by having manageable goals and restore things as they are/were rather than interpret how they were, which I don't think I worded well. But what it's basically saying is we shouldn't have one solid goal where we do this one thing all the time and that's what the end goal is just to have this whole area restored with a couple plants. We got to have realistic goals. We got to know that the environment changes and that what you set out to do, 20 years before isn't going to happen 20 years in the future. It's very difficult working in the environment because things always do change. And especially with climate change, things rapidly are changing right in front of our eyes. The ocean is becoming more acidic. The corals are dying, which leads to less biodiversity in those areas. This didn't happen 50 years ago. It's only happening now. And within the grand scheme of things, within human time frame, 50 years is nothing. That's absolutely nothing. And so it's crazy that we're just not more adaptive. We have to be more adaptive and set these goals to where they will change. And we're okay with them changing because right now we're not at all, which is very bad. They said we need to jointly prioritize actions, meaning that conservation and restoration need to work together. So what that means is you inherit this big site that you're going to restore and you're going to conserve. Rather than saying, okay, let's just restore everything. Let's conserve everything. You have to take things as they are. You have to go and restore areas and then have long-term monitoring for them and conserve them. Because if you don't, you're going to turn back to the same exact state they were before. Completely disturbed areas, no native plants, no native animals, and it's not going to be great. You have to have these long-term monitoring sites. Leaving sites that are restored will only lead to the degradation of the site and ultimately need more restoration work to be satisfactory. You have to have more long-term monitoring at these sites. You also have to enlist public support. You have to talk to people a lot more, which is something that I've harped on. And in this podcast, I will continually talk about science communication. It is the absolute key in the puzzle. I was going to say the last puzzle piece. It's the absolute key the scientists need to do anything. If you don't have public support, you're not going to do anything. People don't support the vaccine, and so they don't get it. So there's less funding for it. If people 100% with certainty supported the vaccine, we would be in a much better spot right now. But they're not, because people have their own opinions, which is, everybody has their own opinions. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but scientists can't do this stuff alone. Support, and more importantly, help from the public is absolutely essential in accessing funding and grants of lands. For a long time, scientists have had a bad rep, and justifiably so. Scientists have to mend their relationship with the public via helpful and genuine conversations like the one we're having right now, and explaining these complex topics in a more digestible manner. Having conversations like we are now is completely necessary to the future of our planet and all of the organisms that inhabit it. We absolutely have to keep having these open, genuine conversations, throwing all of our preconceived notions out of the window, throwing all of our egos out of the window, and having these open conversations where we talk to people. We understand both of their sides, and we keep talking. It's what the world needs, it's what the public needs, it's what scientists need. And this is absolutely what we have to do. And I'll continually talk about that topic for a long time. One of the biggest things we talked about in my 4 years in college was the fact that realistically, other than people, like I know that Nico, I know that Sky, you guys are both scientists. You're both at least studying to be scientists. But not that many people in the grand scheme of things have friends who actively work in the environment, or especially on Twitch. How many people do you guys know on Twitch that have, that work in the environment, that work as a biologist, that work in this kind of stuff? I can guarantee you, I don't know a single person. I mean, okay, I know people who are nurses, and I know people who are doctors and stuff like that on Twitch. But I don't know anybody else in this entire industry, in the entire Twitch industry, who is an ecologist, who is a biologist. It's insane. Yeah, Nico says I'm the only person. Sky says I'm the only person. It's crazy. The fact that this conversation is not being had on a platform as big as Twitch is genuinely insane to me. The only person that I know of who's an actual biologist who actually goes out every single day, works in the field with birds, with animals, with plants, is Maya. And she's big for a reason, because she fills that niche that people are so desperately looking for. You know, I'm sure if you look within her community, you obviously would see a lot more people who know biologists, who are a biologist. But outside of it, in the Overwatch community, the one that I'm in, there's nobody. You see nurses, you see stuff like that, but nobody who's an actual environmentalist, ecologist, stuff like that. It's hard. So having these open, genuine conversations with people and talking to you guys is 100% essential to mending the relationship scientists have with the world, and also increasing funding for more restoration projects, which people love to see. There's a lot of studies, I didn't actually include any in this. There's countless studies that show that the more greenery you have in cities, the happier people are. It's a proven fact that the more trees you have next to you makes it so it kind of is a predictor in terms of your well-being. How much time you spend out in nature every single day is also a big thing. I was unemployed for about a month and a half, and I was living with my girlfriend at the time. And I went from being outside every single day, working in nature, seeing greenery every single day, to being stuck inside for a month and a half. And it absolutely took a toll on my mental. I went into a state of depression, and I didn't want to do anything. And it was just a complete spiral for that month and a half. I'll be completely honest. It was not a good time. I was streaming the whole time. I was acting like it was a great time, but it wasn't. And I think it was because I didn't get outside and I didn't do anything. There wasn't much greenery in the city that we were in, because it was more right-leaning. So it was very urban. But having these bigger restoration sites, or even having sites outside of a city that are close nearby that you can drive to and just walk around, is amazing. I recently took running up as a hobby of mine. I went running this morning, and I feel so great running out in nature, not running on a treadmill. Looking at the trees, looking at everything. It's genuinely amazing, and it clears your mind, lets you think. And so even though we can't put an economic we can't say, well, because I was depressed, I didn't do this because there was no trees nearby. You can't put an economic number on that. You can't say, well, that costed us about $1,000 in terms of, no, that's not how it is. But you really have to understand that the long-term effects are way more important than the short-term effects. And in terms of restoration, we always, as a human mindset, it's always about what can I do right here, right now, because that's what we're focused on. We're focused on survival. So we have to shift that mindset to what we can do for the future, because that's ultimately how it is. We're always talking about the future. That's what we should be talking about. And that's what hasn't been talked about for the past 150 years. That's why we're in the state that we are. That's why the climate is raising It's going to raise up 2 more degrees. It's, yeah, like Shaq said, delayed gratification is a really hard concept. It's difficult, but we have to shift our mindset to something like that. And yeah, so that's basically the end of that. But I have a conclusion I want to talk about and kind of just wrap everything up. Science is really difficult. I have a degree in this. I did well in school, but science is still difficult. It's very hard sometimes to wrap your mind around the fact everything is a grayscale. Nothing is set in stone, you know? Even though we call certain things as absolute certainties, they're not. You know, people always say the sun is going to raise no matter what. If you live next to a big wildfire, you can't see the sun. Last year when I lived in Santa Cruz and the whole fires in California, the sun didn't raise. I didn't see the sun for a week straight because of the smoke. Which just goes to show that things always change. Nothing is a certainty. So you have to take everything with a grain of salt and form opinions for yourself based on the facts that we have. And be open to new facts coming out saying that your position is wrong. Because realistically, everything I talk about, I could be totally wrong about. My spiel about everything, throw out the window. Restoration's bad, actually, guys. It's hard, and it's something that we really have to keep talking about. And again, the pandemic has truly shown that science just keeps on changing, and people can't accept that. People get very up in arms about that, which is absolutely not good. And again, we need to engage in conversation with everyone to gain different viewpoints. They're completely vital to having, in the back of your mind all the time and maintaining an open mind. To have an open mind, you have to be able to talk to people about different viewpoints and understand that even if you don't agree with it, it's still true. Eric Katz, even though I don't agree with his position that saying that restoration isn't that good because technically it's all just human imprints on stuff, it's really good. Restoration is very good. And even though I don't agree with him on that kind of stuff, it's still great to take his thoughts, take his opinions and his well-worded conversation and include that in how you frame your thoughts on things. It changed my view on restoration a little bit reading this whole paper today because it's like, God, humans really do just do everything selfishly. There's nothing that we do that's unselfish, and it's a very hard thing to talk about and to think about. Scientists need to absolutely throw their egos out the window. We need to have these open conversations a lot more often. We need to just not use jargon, not think that we're the smartest people in the world, because we're not. Scientists are, even though there are a lot of smart scientists, the more you look into something, the more you realize how little you actually know. The more you think, one big thing that happened to me when I worked at the reserve, I knew probably close to like 80 or 100 species by their genus and their species. And I thought to myself, I know everything here. And I got really cocky. I was like, I don't have to do anything. Man, this is so great. Like, I know everything here. And I talked to people that knew the entire ecosystem and all the plants around the reserve I worked at. And I was like, God, I literally know nothing. And this is just in one city. And so it shattered my confidence. And I was down for about a month trying to regain it. And so it's a big thing having to drop your ego for everything. Also, so I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. Again, we'll have a 30-minute Q&A talking about everything. If we can go for that long. If not, that's all good. But yeah, again, restoration is a very hard topic. Things are very much on a grayscale. Not all restoration is good. Things can be bad. Things can be done very poorly. But what it boils down to is we as scientists and as conservationists and as restorationists need to have more of a conversation with the public and talk about this kind of stuff because it includes you guys. You guys want to see more areas restored, more areas conserved. And so it gives more money for us to go out and restore these areas, and also gives us so that more people will donate their land if they pass away, which again just keeps on talking. It keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so that we keep on restoring and conserving more areas. And yeah, it is one takeaway. Keep an open mind in terms of science. Things will and things will always change no matter what. Like you guys have seen the pandemic. Okay, so we're gonna have a Q&A for about 15 to 30 minutes depending on what's going on. So if you guys want to follow the podcast, I did make a Twitter today. I think I followed it. I think it's just like Nature with Danny on Twitter, and I'll be giving updates about that kind of stuff. I'll probably go back and clip some of the things that I said, things that I thought were like really well put, because realistically a lot of things weren't well put. This is my first time doing a podcast. I apologize if things were very disjointed. it's a learning curve for me. It's a learning curve for you guys. But yeah. One big thing I want to talk about too, I think is really cool. Okay, so the background I have right now, so if I get rid of this, it's just a black background. What I want to do is have you guys submit your own pictures that you guys have taken of nature, and I will review them, I'll look at them, and if I think that they're very good, or if I think that they're like, that I like them a lot, I'll use them as a background. I took the picture that that's in the background here right now. I think it was on my 5th anniversary with my girlfriend. I took the picture. And so if you guys have any pictures you guys feel are really, really good and you want to send them, there's a link in there's a post in the server. And so every week I'm going to have a different background. So this one was just for today. I have a whole bunch of other pictures as well. So if there's no pictures that are great, or if we run out of pictures, I have a whole bunch that I'll use as the background. But if you guys want to, make sure to join the Discord. I will be looking through the pictures and saving the ones that I think are really, really good and using them as a background. And yeah, I'm going to post the audio of this on Spotify, on SoundCloud, and probably on iTunes in a couple weeks, because I was reading stuff today and it says that it's best to wait 3 to 5, wait until you have like 3 to 5 podcasts before you release it on iTunes. So I'll probably do that, just so that people don't get mad that I only have one podcast on there, which apparently happens. And yeah, I think that should be it. Like I said, make sure to submit pictures in the Discord if you guys want to have them on the background. I'll be posting a YouTube video with the podcast with a Q&A on it as well. I recorded all this stuff, so it should be very high quality. And so if you guys missed it, it'll be on YouTube. The VOD will be on Twitch. I'll be uploading it to Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, and all the other services you guys want me to. And yeah, that's it. All right. You guys got any questions? I can start to read chat now. I grew up to Steve Irwin. He was a hero to me, so I wanted to go out and do what he did. Yeah, dude, man. Steve Irwin. Okay, one big hero I have now is David Attenborough. I really, really respect David Attenborough for everything that he does. It's crazy. If I was born in the 30s or stuff or when he was born, I would absolutely want to do the same things he did. Like, it's amazing the work that he's done. In your opinion, what do you think would be the best way to accomplish restoration of an area? That's a really good question. And this answer happens a lot in science. It depends. It really depends on the site. The areas that I've worked in so far, we do a lot of plug planting. So what that means is that you take the seeds from these things, or you take shoots or the rhizomes, and you can actually convert them, or they'll propagate into actual plants. And so you can take those and you can plug them directly into the ground, and they'll grow from there. It has a really high rate of, actually, wait, let me change this. Perfect. Plugging plants in the ground has a very high rate of them actually surviving. The other alternative is just putting out a ton of seed. And while that works well because it makes it so the plants grow in their best areas, it can also lead to low conversion rates of seeds to plants. And so it's a very expensive thing to have happen the efficacy of it is lower. So say you go out and you drop all these seeds over this huge area, you're not going to have a super high efficacy, and it costs a lot of money to get all of those seeds. And so it's very good in some ways, but it's also not very good. And again, with plugging plants, it makes it so that you only specifically plant them in areas where you deem it best, which is not the best thing. Like it talked about in that one source, where he basically said, we're imprinting all of our thoughts on this, which is how it is. But yeah, also, Yumi, I don't think it was your internet. I think my internet was dropping a lot too. You know how many times I hear my outcome professor say it depends when someone asks a question? Dude, yeah, it's crazy. Are we allowed to submit picture backgrounds now? Yeah, you can submit them now. I'll check them out and they'll be on the next podcast. I have it, like I said, I have a whole bunch of pictures that I've taken because I take a lot of pictures when I'm out in marshes and stuff like that. But please submit them. Make sure they're high quality. I want to have it so that it doesn't look super, even the one I have right now, let me get rid of this. Even the one I have right now is middle quality, but yeah. I know it's mine, I'm sure. I have 23% dropped frames right now. My bitrate is showing red on Twitch and it's constantly going up and down. So yeah. You should go Mark Twain National Forest. It's a huge nature reserve in Missouri. Hell yeah, brother. Go there for trips with my friends. Where have I gone recently? I mean, living in Santa Cruz, obviously there's a ton of good coastline and a ton of good redwood forest we would go to all the time. So I have a bunch of cool pictures. But yeah, like I said, yeah, I'm gonna comb through them and see the best ones, and then use those as the podcast backgrounds. And again, for those of you that weren't here in the beginning, I'm gonna try to have the podcast happen every Friday at about 7:30 or 8 p.m. And I'll keep you guys updated on the Twitter that I have for it, which is twitter.com/naturewithdanny. If you guys follow that, I'll be giving updates. If you guys are on the Discord, I'll be giving updates on my Discord as well. Yeah, man, I haven't talked that much in a long time. So Sky mentioned that I need to stop people talking so fast. That's true. I absolutely do. I talk way, way, way too fast. It's crazy. It's very crazy how much I talk. I appreciate that, Sky. I appreciate you saying I did well. It's hard. Like I said, I was so nervous before this, and I'm still nervous because I'm going to go back and watch the VOD. I'm going to go back and see what I talked about. What time zone? PST, Pacific Standard Time. So it'll be 7:30 PST or 8 p.m. PST every Friday. Maybe not next Friday, though. Oh, okay. Next Friday is a 24-hour stream, and I'm going to make an update on my Discord after this. Next Friday is a 24-hour stream. And so maybe I'll start with the podcast and then go to or even have the podcast, because I got to do all the research. I didn't realize how much, dude. Okay. Do you guys want to see my sheet for my note sheet that I had today? Let me show you guys. Can I pull it up on here? Oh, you know what I can do? Browser. Notes. Oh. Am I dumb? That's not gonna work. I have to sign in. No way. Well, I liked it. Very informative. Thank you. I appreciate that. Like I said, I think that I used honestly way too much jargon, more than I wanted to. I need to not talk as much, really think about the things that I say, and say things in a much more digestible manner, which is exactly the same thing that I was harping on, which I don't like. So I need to do a better job about that. What kind of restoration do you want to do in the future, or conservation? Well, it's not about stuff that I want to do, right? And that's a big thing. Is a lot of people, and this isn't just at Yulia, but please expand the picture in Discord. I'm not going to expand the picture in Discord right now. What picture in Discord are you talking about? I'm not going to expand that picture. I'm not going to expand that picture right now. 24-hour stream October 30th? No, Shaq. 24-hour stream September 24th. September 24th. The kind of conservation or restoration I want to see in the future. I want to see wide scale restoration and conservation within cities, especially. I think that's a big thing that has not been focused on. Is we need to have more parks. We need to have things a lot less fragmented. Fragmentation of habitats is very, very, very detrimental. And fragmentation is basically if you have one area that covers like this, and so this is all one big park, and you cut it in half, so now it's split like this. And so you create a huge city in the zone where you took everything out, but the animals can't cross from this point down to here. And so fragmentation is really, really bad. For you personally with work, like I said, before I did a restoration in wetlands, in coastal scrub, in a lagoon setting, and on dunes, and in grasslands. And I really, really, really enjoyed all of that. I think that wetlands, that paper I talked about ecosystem services, says that wetlands economically are the most impactful for ecosystem services. They just provide so much sequestration, if that's a word. They absorb like 96 or 97% of all phosphorus and nitrogen that we release, and then use that as a fertilizer. So it's really great. But yeah, so things that I would want to do in the future. I love working in marshes so far. I think it's really great. I think it's something that's very underrepresented, but you can't always keep doing that. And so I would want to keep working in wetlands, or I'd want to keep working in sensitive areas, I think, because you can do restoration in a whole entire grassland, and that's great. And I love grasslands. They're probably my favorite ecosystem. But I think sensitive habitats like marshes or sensitive habitats like streams, rivers, or wetlands in general are, are very, very essential to maintaining things. I'm not going to pull the shape up in Discord. I'm not going to pull it up. I'm not going to pull it up. The first podcast, I know it's perfect. We'll get better in no time. Thank you, Yumi. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around. I appreciate all you guys, being here. This is something I was super nervous to do, something I'm still nervous to talk about, even though I have a degree in it and I've talked about it a lot with a lot of people. Whenever I'm out with somebody for the first time at my job, I feel like the first 2 hours is us complaining about the state that we're at. Is us complaining about everything. It's really, it's very easy being in this field to just constantly complain about things because so many things are going wrong. So many things are going wrong. This is what I'm in school for. Why wouldn't I be here? Well, even still, I appreciate it. I know that I didn't word things amazingly the whole time, which is why I want to also give you guys the notes that I took because I think, dude, I'm going to do it. I'm going to pull it up. The notes that I took are like genuinely really good. I really was proud of the things that I said in it. Let me change this. Let me delete this. What do you guys want to do me for? We love to hear your takes. Thanks, Leah. I don't know about that. Know about what? I'm just here for support. I appreciate it, Chuck. I appreciate all you guys. And move that. Bring this up. Display capture. Let's add my left monitor. Okay. Can you see all that? This is my note sheet, by the way. This is all the notes that I took. Have a letter of the podcast, give an introduction to myself, philosophical debate about restoration and land usage. I have a source right there, which is what I talked about. All these quotes I mentioned. I said one thing I really like this whole paragraph right here. This is a very pessimistic view, but again, a view that must be shared to further enhance our restoration and conservation efforts, rather than stifle in the name of conversations. We must let systems be as wild as it can be, while also helping them get there. It creates a catch-22, and so that helping nature at all is imprinting ourselves, while leaving them would also be imprinting. This creates a hard line to pass, where inaction is the same as action, when that is simply not the case. Action in these situations is always better. I really like that. You told me when we got ramen, the podcast is supposed to be about politics and debating everyone. You guys want me to do that on stream? I'll debate somebody on stream. I need to learn more about it. I'll debate somebody on stream right now. Who wants to debate? What else did I like? Yeah, I got all this kind of stuff. Political stream? Pog you. What do you guys okay, you guys want to get political right now? What do you guys want to get political about? What do you guys want to get political about? Look at all these sources I got. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 with all these notes that I took on them. This one was one that I disagreed with it. I disagreed with this whole entire paper, but it was very interesting to read because he was so eloquent in how he wrote everything. He worded things so succinctly and so well that it was so much fun to read. It's very wordy, very wordy. Do socialist propaganda, hack capitalism. Listen, there's a meme I saw recently that talked about, yes, guy, swallow a red pill but not a jab. Man, you guys want to talk about Nicki Minaj? Nicki Minaj has Botox out the wazoo. She has implants in her ass. But she won't get a COVID vaccine? Come on. Maybe, okay, well, hold on. Hail capitalism. She's almost 40. Daddy Trump saying we need to rake the floors and then we don't have forest fires anymore. True. Okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stop stream just so I can have this as a VOD, and then I'll start stream again. So give me 1 second. I'll be back in a second.